what do I want the outcomes to be? And what am I going to pay attention to? And how do I want to show up in the world and for this person? And kind of making sure that those are the things that I'm focused on regardless of how the day goes. And then, I try, and I'm not perfect. And so it's not like every morning I wake up and this is exactly what happens. But, at the end of the day, I try to kind of do a little audit of like, okay, what went right that, maybe I didn't expect.
Welcome to Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. I'm your host and your coach, Dr. Cynthia. With over 30 years in the corporate world, as a single mom, cancer survivor, and often the only woman in the C-suite, I understand the balancing act high-achieving women face. Tailored for ambitious professional women, this show features candid conversations with powerful business leaders sharing their real stories of success and failure. If you're ready to look up and step up, you're in the right place. Join us now and invest in your future today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking Your Heel. I'm your host and your coach, Dr. Cynthia. I'm super excited about today's guest. We're focused right now on the future of work. When we think about that, we're thinking about how we show up as individuals and how organizations, systems, and leaders show up to support us. And there is no one I can think of that is better prepared to talk about this topic than today's guest, Jen Fisher. She is a global authority on workplace well-being, a best-selling author of Work Better Together: How to Cultivate Strong Relationships to Maximize Well-Being and Boost Bottom Lines, and her new book, Hope is the Strategy, due out January 2026. She's also the CEO of the Wellbeing Team, host of the Work Well podcast, and co-creator of Well Q360. As Deloitte's US's first Chief Wellbeing Officer, she pioneered a human-centered approach to work that reshaped how organizations view well-being. She's also, among all of her other credentials, taught at Harvard, UCLA, spoken at TEDx, WorkHuman, South by Southwest, and contributed to Fortune, CNN, and Harvard Business Review. She has a lot of credentials, but she is also someone who learned the hard way that hope isn't what you turn to after strength fails. It's the strength we've been looking for all along. So welcome to the show, Jen. So good to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. I feel like I need to take you with me everywhere so you can do
Oh,
that incredible introduction.
I'll be your intro gal. Yes. Well, for the person listening, I had the distinct privilege and honor of having a preview of Hope is the Strategy. And there's so many incredible nuggets. And I want to just start by saying that right out of the gate, the first couple of paragraphs, I literally felt like we were separated at birth
Mm.
because I was reading your reflection, and you said, "I wasn't working because of a deadline or crisis. I was working because I didn't know how not to." And that describes 30 years of my career. Just
Yeah.
completely resonates, and I think it resonates likely with the woman listening as well. Talk a little bit about just big picture. What was that pivotal moment, that thing that led you to Hope is the Strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'm glad, but also not glad that that resonated
Right.
because I think that you're right that resonates probably with far too many of us, and um, is the reason why I wanted to write about it and call it out and name it. Because I think we're living in a time, especially as women, when our definition of success is solely focused on what we do for our job, what we do for a living, and we have forgotten that a definition of success includes so much more
Mm.
than what you do for a job. And I think in my own story, when that job comes to an end, whether by it's by your own fruition or something else that's going on, we lose our identity. We forget who we are. We have nothing else to fall back on because we've defined ourselves for so long by what we do, and how we spend kind of our days and our hours. And so I had literally lost myself. And I thought that the only reason that I mattered or that anyone valued me was because the work that I did, and that I would show up at parties and dinner events and spend time with my friends, and I would talk about the work that I was doing and where I was traveling to, and conversations that I was having with really important people, because I thought that that's what made me interesting and why people wanted to spend time with me. And honestly, it wasn't. None of them
Mm.
could, like, none of them care about that,
Right.
Like, okay, yeah, it's interesting, it's conversational, but that's not why they were spending time with me. So, what led me to kind of the study and practice of hope was, after I experienced significant burnout. And so this was about 10 years ago, when we weren't talking about burnout in the workplace as much as we are today. And there wasn't a lot of understanding around it. And so, of course, I was working in a very high performing environment. And, I looked around and I was struggling, but it didn't seem like anyone else was struggling. And so I didn't know how to, raise my hand or ask for help or say that I couldn't handle it. And I felt like if I did, that would be perceived as failure. And so I kept my mouth shut and I told myself, like, just continue to power through, put your head down, get your work done. You can rest on the weekend or you can take a vacation when this big project is over. Of course, even the opportunity to do those things created an anxiety in me that, that drew me back to working because it was all I knew how to do and it was
Right.
how I defined myself. And so ultimately, that's not sustainable for anyone. And it led to pretty significant burnout. And it was after my burnout, when I was, quote unquote, in recovery, because I do talk about, in the book that ultimately my addiction was an addiction to work. And
Mhm.
and what's so interesting about an addiction to work, unlike other substance related addictions, is that you are celebrated. You're celebrated by your organization, you're celebrated by your peers, your parents think you're really successful. But when you have a substance addiction, you're kind of on a lot of times kind of on the outskirts of society, yet this
Right.
addiction to work is something that organizations benefit from, so they want you to be addicted to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so for me it was seeking out therapy and clinical help and kind of understanding what was going on with me, and a diagnosis of anxiety and depression, because they really weren't diagnosing burnout at the time. But the therapist that I went to actually, prescribed, hope exercises, had me read C.R. Snyder's work, and had me actually do, practice the science of hope in order to recover from, that was one of the many things that I did, but in order to recover from burnout. And so for me, it was so powerful that I continued to embed those practices, into my daily life on a personal level. And then ultimately, as I grew as a leader and became much more focused on, my personal health and well-being, and then what that looks like inside of one of the largest organizations in the world. And so it's always, for the last 10 years or so, been foundational to who I am, but also to how I lead as a leader, and what I believe is such a powerful skill set that we're not taught. As a matter of fact, I think we're taught the opposite, that hope is not a strategy. So,
Absolutely. 100%. And there's so many nuggets in what you'd said and what you experienced. And I mean, there are so many perverse incentives, right? Of being addicted to work. And
yeah,
again, completely can relate to that. And that sense of that's the purpose and that's what defines you. I think I want to draw attention to the fact that you define burnout as hopelessness.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's a to me as a reader, one of the things that was really jumped out at me is it sort of gave a new depth to this notion of burnout. That's not just tired and exhausted or overworked. It's
Yeah.
hopelessness.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I do think and this is not to minimize true burnout at all. I think it's to, help further define what we're looking at and what we mean, especially in the organizational context, because I think what's been really frustrating to me over the last several years is, that the benefit is that we're talking a lot more about these issues in the workplace, right? We're talking about burnout, but unfortunately, like many things in the well-being and the wellness space, and probably not just exclusively that, but we tend to overuse it.
Mm,
Right? And so I've become worried that, because I hear leaders, openly saying things like burnout's not real, like,
mhm.
oh, that's not true. That doesn't exist. And it absolutely does exist. And I think it's, at epidemic levels, but we're starting to dismiss it because we have overused it. When somebody is, tired or exhausted from working on a hard project, they say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so burnt out." Well, I mean, maybe you are, but are you really, right?
Yes.
And so I'm so glad that you picked up on that because I wanted to kind of create an additional layer, an additional depth to what I think that it is we're seeing. So when I'm speaking with leaders and others that are challenging me, and perhaps rightfully so, to say, like, is burnout really real? Or, kind of challenging me to say, like, hope is not really a strategy. And I say, like, well, let's take a step back. I mean, would you rather be the leader of a hopeful organization or a hopeless organization? And
Right,
that kind of changes, the dialogue and the mindset a little bit of like, oh, wow, I don't want to lead or be a part of a hopeless, or like, who would want that? That sounds horrible. And
right.
so that creates a little bit different, that redirects the conversation and does create a different mindset and a different depth around that. And so I do believe that, a lot of what we're seeing from a burnout perspective, and 100%, if you stay in hopelessness too long, you will ultimately end up in burnout. And that's not to say that, all of us don't feel hopeless at certain points, right? Like, it's very normal and very natural. And it's interesting because I wrote a whole chapter on hopelessness, but that chapter wasn't originally part of the outline of the book because it felt counterintuitive. It was
Right.
like, why would I write about hopelessness when I'm actually trying to, like, teach people how to cultivate hope? But the truth is you can't cultivate real hope without understanding its shadow, without understanding hopelessness. And so I do think that, people are experiencing kind of this hopeless feeling of, nothing that I do matters. Nothing here will ever change. Why am I even going to try? I'm just going to show up and do the bare minimum. So, all of
Mm,
the things that we're categorizing as, like quiet quitting and, all
right.
of these kind of like fancy marketing terms that we've come up for, how disengaged people are in the workplace, I actually think that that's hopelessness. They just don't see a path forward, or they're not experiencing anything that helps them feel like, the future is going to be better that for them than it is today. And so why even try? And that is a horrible place to be as an individual, but as a leader, none of us should be okay with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. It makes
Yeah.
me it draws me back to, a woman that I was coaching and working so hard, literally putting in 18-hour days,
Yeah.
7 days a week, can't keep up, having to lay off staff in the midst of all of this pressure, et cetera, et cetera. Um burnt out as I would have thought about it. But as I'm listening to you unpack the definition of hopelessness and that sense of purpose, what she was really expressing was nothing is changing. It's Groundhog Day. I'm going
Yeah.
through the same, no matter how many hours I work, or how many days a week I work, there's no getting ahead and there's no end in sight. And in her case, we did talk about boundaries and things at which you talk
Yeah.
about. Um, she had a sense of purpose, but it wasn't showing up in place of work. So I'm hearing 2 different
Yeah.
sides of that. One is I want to have a purpose. I feel like I know my purpose, but the organization, the system, the leader, what have you, isn't fostering that.
Yeah.
Or the other side of it is I've lost sight of that. And so I as you sort of start out the book and which I can relate to is that work becomes sort of this lost sense of purpose, working for work's sake. You put
Yeah.
in some really early practical um tools for your morning routine, things that you did to help ground you. Talk
Yeah.
about some of those things that the person listening says, I'm there, I'm feeling some of this, or I'm relating to this. How do they sort of break that cycle?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, it's, when I wake up in the morning, instead of immediately, reaching for my phone or turning on the news, that especially these days is going to, in large part, dictate that you're going to have a bad day.
Right.
I really try to, kind of start my morning slow, sit in silence, think about the possibilities for the day because part of on my hat for those people that are watching or those people that might be listening, I'm wearing a hat that says hope dealer on it. And when somebody says what is a hope dealer, it to me it is somebody, anybody, it doesn't have to be a leader, but somebody that believes in possibility, right? And
Mhm.
so really thinking about kind of the possibilities for the day. What is it that is truly possible in my day from a positive perspective. And this isn't necessarily a toxic positivity, but instead of, looking at my calendar and going, ugh, like here we go again, right? It's like, okay, well, what's actually possible? Like, what do I want the outcomes to be? And what am I going to pay attention to? And how do I want to show up in the world and for this person? And kind of making sure that those are the things that I'm focused on regardless of how the day goes. And then, I try, and I'm not perfect. And so it's not like every morning I wake up and this is exactly what happens. But, at the end of the day, I try to kind of do a little audit of like, okay, what went right that, maybe I didn't expect? What did somebody say that kind of reinforced something positive or that I'm on the right path? And so, I talk about it as like hope spotting, right? Like, what were those moments during the day? Because I think we tend, at least I do, and I don't think I'm that unique because none of us really are, but like, we, when we reflect on our day, we often tend to reflect on the things that went wrong and not the things that went right. And so, like, and there are a lot of things that go right. And that's the thing about hope is like, if you believe in hope, and hope is a strategy, we also kind of tend to think that hope has to be like this big thing,
Mm.
that like it has to be this big transformation. And it's not really hope. Like hope happens in the small moments of connection, and it builds over time. And, I think about kind of some of the most hopeful leaders that in the world that we would all, if I said to you, like, think of a leader that inspires hope, all of us would probably come up with a very similar list or think about big things that happened in the world, big transformations that happened in the world. And I think oftentimes we see it as like, oh, it was this way on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday, everything changed, right? Like
Mm.
we see it as like, wow, there was this big thing that happened overnight. But if you look at the history of those things and the history
Mm.
of those people that they were huge, like change makers and hopeful leaders, it was them kind of leading, hopefully, one step at a time, one step at a time,
Mhm.
and they had a lot of setbacks.
That's right.
And so I try to remind myself of those things and be intentional. And there's so many ways that you can do that. You can do that through like meditative practices. You could do that through journaling. You could do that through, some sort of ritual that you have with your partner or your spouse or a friend or a colleague at work, just making sure that um, because when you start to spot hope a little bit more, behave in ways
That's
that are
right.
hopeful, and then that becomes contagious, and the words that you use are a lot more hopeful, right? They're not cynical, or like you move away from those types of things. And it might sound trivial, but it honestly, it's not. It's so powerful, and when you start seeing the ripple effects, you're like, "Oh, wow, like that's pretty awesome. That's pretty cool."
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
gonna liken it to, so I have a framework, the 7-minute pivot. It beautifully fits with your hope strategy and your morning positivity and hope, which is we can all find 7 minutes, right? So the person
Yeah.
listening that says, "Oh, that sounds really great, but I don't have time for one more thing in my day." Everybody can find 7 minutes. It's more than 5, less than 10, and it's, taking the 7-minute pivot and Jen's strategy for the woman listening is, where are all of the places I have seen hope show up, right? Take 7 minutes, journal about
Yeah.
that, and then what's one small thing I can do today, one small thing to continue to keep hope alive or to feel hopeful. To your point, it doesn't have to be this massive change. It's a mindset, and it's
Yeah.
using that positive language. I love that. You've been
Yeah.
really open in the book and have already mentioned here too about anxiety.
Yeah.
And I am somebody who studies a lot about mental wellness. I wrote my dissertation around mental wellness, etc. So I love the fact that you're open about that and this notion of changing that sort of self-talk and showing up in a way. It was interesting because when I was reading about anxiety and then saying the what if, it
Yeah.
almost starts to sound counterintuitive. Like, does the anxious person really want to start with a what if, right? But
Yeah.
it has a lot to do with how you end the what if, the rest
Yeah.
of the sentence. Talk a little bit about how, for the person listening that tends to maybe catastrophize or
Yeah.
find themselves more in that doom and gloom headspace.
Which is absolutely me, and I kind of wrote a little vignette about this specifically in the book because the science, or the practice of hope based on C.R. Snyder's work, is that you define a goal, and then you come up with multiple pathways in order to reach that goal, and then you need to understand kind of what your agency or your ability is to actually reach that goal. You have to be able to affect change in order to reach that goal. If you don't have those three components, then it's actually not real hope.
Right.
And so I think that that's really important, because most people don't even know that hope is kind of this cognitive process or this cognitive practice, right? And so a good friend of mine, we were having a conversation about hope and the practice of hope. And she knows that I struggle with anxiety and that I live with anxiety. And she said to me, that's really interesting, because isn't wouldn't having like multiple pathways to reach a goal make somebody with anxiety more anxious? Because those of us that live with anxiety, like, we want certainty, which is kind of funny because there is no certainty
Right.
ever. We just like fool ourselves into thinking there is. But wouldn't you want like a one, like, surefire way, like one path to get there? And it was such an intuitive question for me, and we had a long conversation about it, and then I kind of had to take it away. And I think what I realized about hope, and for me, kind of hope and anxiety, is that the multiple pathways to reach a goal is actually not anxiety producing. It's much more comforting, because it's like, okay, I now know 3 ways or 4 ways
Mm,
in which I can reach this goal. So if I go down one path and I get stuck, I don't actually get stuck, right? Like, if there's a barrier, like, I don't go to catastrophe, which I'm really good at, like, everybody's fine and healthy, and then my anxiety within 30 seconds flat will talk, well, like, the world is ending and we're all dead, right? Like, I am the, like, Olympic level catastrophizer. But what the multiple pathways do is allow me to say, okay, wow, like, I'm stuck, this is a barrier, I don't know how to overcome it, but I've already identified 3 other ways in which I can reach this goal, and so I don't have to catastrophize. I don't have to get super anxious about it. I can just change course, and I've already identified what those are, and I can just say,
Mm,
"Oh, okay, so for me, the strategy of hope or the practice of hope has been a great tool in my toolbox, among others, for helping with my anxiety, but it does seem very counterintuitive until you start to understand it and practice it for sure."
absolutely, and it's that yeah, it's that spirit of the possibilities because it
Yeah,
gives you more than one, to your point,
right,
possibility of how to solve something rather
right. You're
than if
not
that
stuck. You're
you're
never
not
stuck, right?
stuck,
And being
there's
stuck is the
options.
worst thing for
Yes.
someone with anxiety.
Yes, or when the very first thing doesn't go as planned, it's then nothing's going to work. Absolutely. I wanna read, one of the excerpts that struck me. For a woman in leadership, the pressure compounds. It's not enough to perform. You have to make it look
Mm,
effortless. It's not enough to succeed. You have to be an inspiration. It's not enough to lead. You have to be a role model. The margin for error shrinks as the expectations expand. Kind of hearkening back to earlier in the conversation, but I mean, this is so profound for the woman listening because, all the all the evidence, all the research, we try so hard to wear the cape in all of those ways in which you mentioned. And then there's shame, which you also
mhm.
talk about.
Yeah.
There's shame when we can't do it all because it's not sustainable or it's not realistic. How did you come to terms with the shame? Because you talk about that,
Yeah.
um, and the advice that you give to the woman that says, "I probably am at that point, but I don't dare admit it."
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think that, in many ways, this is where, as women, the system has failed us, right? And so I think, we just need to give ourselves and each other permission to not be perfect and not do it all. And what I will say is, I think this shame for me, it wasn't like all of a sudden I made a decision or I changed my definition of success and the shame went away. I think how the shame went away was by showing up more authentically and more truthfully and honestly with my teams and the people that I cared about and that cared about me, and letting them know, "Hey, I made a bad decision. I made a mistake. Hey, I'm struggling right now. I can't take this on. I could use some help. Hey, I am having a lot of anxiety around what leadership has asked us to do. I'm not exactly sure how we're going to be successful, but I believe in our ability to come together and do something,"
Mm,
right? People want, somebody asked me this question recently too, that, like, a lot of these things, especially around, like hope and kindness and love in the workplace, are very gendered. And she was asking me, like, how do you overcome those? And I think my answer was something, if I remember correctly, was something like, you know what, like, I just ignore those, right? Because if you think that that's gendered, then, like, I have a superpower that you don't have, and I lean into that because now more than ever people want to work for human beings. I mean, this is what we're seeing from a hopelessness perspective and a mattering perspective. The work of Zach Mercurio, around mattering. Like, people want to know that you care about them. And the best way to let them know that you care about them is by being human, and this doesn't mean, authenticity, as a leader doesn't mean, getting on a call or in a meeting with your team and throwing up all of your deepest, darkest secrets. That's
right,
not what authenticity
right.
means. but it means showing that you're human. It means showing that you don't have all the answers. It means, telling your team that you could use a little bit of help, or you don't have the capacity right now, or that you need to set this boundary for yourself, because that humanizes you and it also gives them permission to do the same thing. And
Mm,
so, but it doesn't have to be done overnight and it doesn't have to be done in one big fail swoop. I just encourage people, try little by little. And I think that's what I did. Like all of these things around vulnerability that I thought, like, oh, wow, as a woman, I can't be vulnerable. Like
right,
if I shed one tear or I show 1 ounce of weakness, like that's it. And so little by little, I started doing it in ways that felt okay for me. And that's going to be different for everybody. What feels okay for you? Like you shouldn't do things that make you feel wildly uncomfortable or exposed right out of the bat, because then you're
right.
going to freak out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it happened to me kind of by accident, and one particular I'll never forget, a woman that worked for me, the vice president that worked for me, I called her. I was doing 2 jobs at the time, and, I remember calling her, to ask her to help me. I needed her to take an interview for me. I was interviewing a candidate, and I was back to back, and I was literally at the end of my rope. And the minute she answered the phone and I said, "Hey, I'm just calling to ask if you can help me with something," I started crying
Mhm,
and was just bizarre, right? Start crying. And I'm like, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. Let me pull myself together. I'm tired, I'm exhausted, I'm stressed out, whatever. She was more than happy to take it on, but if she were to tell the story, she always likes to say, "Yes, yes, Cynthia, but what you don't say is the week prior, she had called me and got really upset and was crying about
mm,
something,
yeah,
but she reported to me. So see, in my mind, that was okay. That's what I'm there for, I'm her leader. But
yeah,
it humanized me as her leader, and it validated her as, you know what? Everybody has their breaking point. Everybody, it's okay to ask for help.
yeah,
And I remember thinking, gosh, that thing that I was initially so embarrassed about actually created this deeper bond, um, based on vulnerability, authenticity, being human.
yeah,
So you're
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, I mean, I think, for the woman that's struggling with this, it's just such a this definition of what strong leadership is such a dated and old definition. And fortunately or unfortunately or sadly, or depending on how you look at it, I think it is up to us women to actually change the workplace for the better. Like
Mm,
we are the ones that are going to come forward and lead in this way. And I often tell people, especially when I reflect back on my years as the chief well-being officer, inside the world's largest professional services firm, which, professional services firms aren't necessarily known for the deep care of their people, right? They're known for the grind and the burn and churn, and people go there to get their experience. And, many of them, unfortunately, like me, are probably, or like I was, are probably addicted to their work, right? And so, for me, it was, I think what I discovered over time is I kind of bucketed people into 3 categories. There were the people that got it, and those were like the flag carriers. Those were my people. Not in the sense of like I'm going to create an echo chamber, but it can never just be you, right?
right,
Like change doesn't happen, hope doesn't grow in a silo, or alone. It happens in community. And so you need that community to keep going. And then there's that middle bucket of people that are like, yeah, this sounds really good, but I'm afraid. I don't know how to do it. What does that look like? Can you help me? Can you tell me? Just tell me what to do. Like
right,
just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And then there's this third bucket that, is typically well, I didn't grow up this way, or the organization didn't do this for me. So why do we need to do it now? And at some point, not that I gave up on those people, but I just stopped spinning my wheels. I
hmm
would have a conversation. I would say, like, well, isn't it? really your responsibility to kind of leave the workplace better than when you found it, right? Like all of us should aspire, that should be the definition of success, truthfully, is that we leave the workplace and the world a little bit better than when we found it.
Agree.
And if that doesn't get to them, kind of the conversation about legacy and like what do you want to leave the world behind, or what do you want to create for your children or your grandchildren, or people that you care about that happen to be younger than you, then I'm kind of like, okay, look, they're just closed off, they're stuck, they're in a fixed mindset, and like that's okay. But I don't waste a lot of time there because you could spin your wheels, right? I focus much more on the people that already get it and like, how do we move this forward together? And how do we bring those in that middle bucket along and help them so that they too learn to lead in a better way?
Absolutely. Statistically, moving that middle group, that zone of
Yeah.
indifference, right? They just it sounds good, but they don't know, um,
Yeah.
is much easier,
Yeah.
um, to move them, and that's probably where the majority fall.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right? There's probably, extremes on both ends, and then you've got a large majority that says, "Well, I mean, it makes sense. I just don't know how
Yeah.
to do it."
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
Or
w
a lot of them are scared, right? That's not the
right.
norm here. That's not what
Yes.
gets rewarded here. How do I do it in a way that's going to be viewed, positively and not negatively? And I hear that so much.
Sure, sure. That
Yeah.
doesn't feel like what we
Yeah.
celebrate, what we
Yeah.
reward. And sadly, and this is a bit of a generalization, but I'm going to say it anyway. I feel oftentimes women can be the worst offenders of that group of, well, I had to do it differently. So should others, right? I had to work and I had to make sacrifices and I missed kids' things or what have you. I paid my dues. Why should it be easier for the next generation? Um, which leads to my question: how do women in particular pay it forward and become better dealers of hope? How do
Yeah.
we get more women in particular to lean into that?
It's interesting because I do think that it is, and again, this is a generalization because because um specifically related to my hat, because I get lots of commentary and I've kind of done this little social experiment about my hat because I'm always wearing it. More men have commented that they like my hat than women. But what I will say is that these things that are viewed traditionally as soft skills, which we all know aren't soft, they're essential, tend to, be more inherent in, from feminine energy. So
Mhm.
either in women or, men that are in touch with kind of that energetic field, not to be woo woo, right?
Right, right. 100%.
And so I think, what you're talking about is, women that are kind of like, well, I didn't, I had it hard and I had to fight. And to me, that's more conditioning of the system than who they naturally are. And quite frankly, who we naturally are as humanity, right? Like that is what they were told they had to do to be successful. And they were successful, right? Like they fought hard and
Right.
they earned this success. And I'm not trying to take that away from them, but do you really want everybody to fight that hard?
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not fighting hard and working hard and having ambition and wanting to achieve is not the same, right? Fighting against a system that was never set up for you to be successful as a woman to begin with is
Mm.
very different than me having ambition and goals and wanting to achieve and wanting to be successful. But we can no longer be okay with, and I talk about this in the book, that that this idea of the corner office, and I use it in the book as a metaphor of, we've all been striving for this ideal of what we think the corner office brings us, but then oftentimes, especially with women, I've heard them, get to these corner office roles and kind of go like, wow, like this is what this is. And like the
Yes.
bigger house and the better car and all of those things, they're realizing that while they absolutely bring a certain level of comfort, they don't necessarily bring fulfillment
Right.
because we've had to step on others and we've had to compete with others. And will there always be some level of competition in our workplaces? Probably. Like that's kind of what, there not everybody can be the CEO. I get
Right.
that. But is there a better way to get to CEO if that's what you aspire to be? Right? Does it
Exactly.
have to be, like I'm going to climb the ladder and kick everybody down underneath me, And that's such a dated we know it doesn't work. It's a broken system.
1000%.
Yeah.
I wanna highlight something you said, and I wanna say it back to you to make sure that, first of all, that I'm hearing it accurately because I think it's really important. What I'm hearing you say is you can have hope and possibilities and be in a culture of, an organization that's filled with hope, be a leader that inspires hope or an individual that inspires hope, and be ambitious
Yeah.
and have big aspirations for your career path. What I don't hear you saying is those things are mutually exclusive, that in a hopeful environment, you sort of give up these ambitions and you sort of let the world take you where it goes and be more fulfilled in the little things in life. That may be true for some people, but
Yeah.
I don't hear you saying for the person listening that's going, "I'm driven, I'm ambitious, I wanna be the, top spot, whatever." You're not saying don't that's a bad thing. Do that with hope,
Absolutely.
not for the sake of
Do
just
that with I
working
mean,
yourself.
like absolutely, right? As a matter of fact, I think hope is a fuel or the fuel for that fire, right?
Mhm.
And that's why the book is called Hope is the Strategy. Yes, I'm being cheeky and kind of and pushing back against the idea that hope is not a strategy. What I'm not saying is that hope is the only strategy,
Right.
right? Like I'm not what I'm saying is that we as leaders, in like everything about work is changing so quickly. We're living in an environment organizationally, societally, in our communities that is uncertain, constantly disrupted, AI uncertainty, like all the things, right? And so what I consult with leaders on is, and you don't even have to call it your hope strategy if that feels like too soft for you, right? But what I consult with leaders on is like, you have this big grand strategy and it makes sense to you, but in order for your strategy to be successful, you have to get your people on board with it. You
Mm.
cannot execute this strategy alone. It will not be successful if you force it down people's throats. Maybe, for a short term, it will be successful and you'll create a culture of compliance, but you won't create a culture of innovation or a culture of hope or a culture of engagement or any of the things that we want as leaders. So you have to have a hope strategy. This sits alongside of your transformation strategy because what hope does is people believe in a better tomorrow. They believe in a better future. And so if your transformation, your strategy is about creating a better future for your organization and the people in it, you better well have a hope strategy. And that goes for you on
Absolutely.
an individual level, it goes for a team level, it goes for an organization level. So I just think that, ambition and success and all of these things, you pour hope on top of it and it, like it, that's the rocket fuel, right? And so I'm absolutely not saying that. As a matter of fact, I'm saying quite the opposite.
Right. Absolutely.
That hope is this missing, really powerful missing ingredient that we're
Yes.
ignoring, yet it's accessible to all of us in such easy ways.
Right. It's such the
Yeah.
secret sauce, and I
Yeah.
think Gen Z has really started to demonstrate this for us. I
Yes.
think that they have a hope strategy or a hope desire, aspiration,
Yep.
etcetera. They're seeking it, looking for it, and, have gotten a lot of backlash and criticism for wanting more sense of purpose
Yeah.
and hopefulness. Um couple I want to read this last this additional quote from the book, and then I want to make sure we talk about where people can get the book and your final words of wisdom. But I just love this. It really spoke to me. The freedom of enough. When you
Mm,
tap into a sense of strength that comes from honoring your limitations while still being filled with purpose, and embrace radical honesty as a kindness to yourself and others, the knowledge that you are enough quickly follows. I just thought that that was a beautiful way of talking about sort of you talk about hope and hopelessness can coexist wherever
yeah,
you are right in this moment. That ownership, that honoring whatever that is, acknowledging it, not having shame in it, giving yourself grace, and then figuring out, where does your hope come from? How do you foster your own sense of hope more where you are, or if you need to pivot to something else? I think it's,
yeah.
to me, that makes me hopeful. Just that sentence.
Yeah, I mean, I think, most of us, regardless of gender, um, struggle with feelings of not enoughness. We
Mm,
live in a world that, and my background is in marketing, so I'm not throwing shade at the marketers of the world, but we live in a world that, everything that is fed to us is basically telling us that, who we are isn't enough, what we have isn't enough, what we do isn't enough. The whole cut hustle grind culture, is this culture of more, more, more. And sometimes more is fine, more is better, right? Like you again, we've already talked about kind of aspirations, right? But just because you're not there yet doesn't mean that you're not enough.
yeah.
And so I think that if you are a kind of hope centered, purpose driven, like if you've done the work for yourself to understand what do you value and what matters to you and what are the pathways in which you can get there, it's a lot easier to spot those things and say, that's interesting and I'm on my path and
Mhm.
where I am right now is enough, as opposed to being like, oh, well, she got the promotion and I didn't, or he did this and I didn't, or they have this and I don't. But the world kind of feeds off of our comparison of one another. Again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have ambition. We should. I think it's important. I'm a very ambitious person.
Absolutely, clearly.
And I'm very tenacious and I don't give up easily, when I set out to do something. However, I more often than not try to compare myself against myself instead of against everyone else. And so remembering, and I when I talk to people that are particularly like in the field of workplace well-being or care deeply about workplace well-being, um often the conversation is like we're not doing enough or we haven't come far enough or there's still so much to do. Yes, there is still so much to do, but actually like if you take a step back and you look at all of the things that we've done, we've done quite a lot. The fact that we're having these conversations, at the top levels of organizations, and leaders know that this isn't something that they can continue to ignore. You mentioned Gen Z and the younger generation. In my mind, we already know this is baseline for them. They are not
Right?
willing to accept working for an organization that doesn't care about who they are or their well-being or provide them with some level of purpose and meaning in their work, right? And so it is changing the dynamics and the expectations of work. And again, that's where, I go back to what I said earlier, like the biggest transformations that we've seen in history or in our lifetime didn't happen overnight. And they may not have even happened in a single generation, right? It could be things that happened over multi generations, but that doesn't mean that the work that we're doing doesn't matter. It means that the work that we're doing is just as important and we need to keep doing it with the same passion and rigor as everything else. And then, passing that on to the next generation, if that's what it means, but that's our role in the transformation.
Yeah. And all of
So,
those things in history happened because somebody envisioned or a group of people envisioned hope for a better future, hope for
yep,
better
yeah,
humanity, hope for solving some world problem. Um, and I think that's who we are at our core, right?
yeah,
Humanity is we want to see the possibilities and the betterness.
yeah.
Um,
And by the way, hope is something that AI can't do.
Yeah, you yes, thank you. There's a couple of times in this conversation I've been wanting to put a fine point because I'm all about the uniquely human advantage,
Yeah,
and it isn't. It's the things that we called soft skills they are our unique human advantage, and they're our superpowers, and they cannot be replaced by
right.
computers or machine learning or AI. So, it is something I think that what you are putting forward, not only is it grounded in evidence and research and psychology, et cetera, but it's so timely because we are at a time, I think, um, in the world today where there is some degree of hopelessness, number
Yeah,
one. And number two, that again, the generations are changing in the way of expectations, and technology is becoming such a focal point
yeah.
that this is the secret sauce. This is the opportunity to lean in. Um, Depending on when you're listening to this episode, at a minimum, you can pick up Jen's new book, um, pre-sale. And where would you like to direct them to get their fresh copy that'll be in their mailboxes as early as late January, early February 2026? And if you're listening to this later in the year, order today and have it, 24 hours later from Amazon.
Yeah, absolutely. You can order Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. If you like to go independent, bookshop.org. You can go to your local bookseller, if that's what you prefer, and they can order it for you if they don't stock it. Yeah, I mean, really anywhere where you prefer to buy your books, you can definitely find it.
Yeah, so pick up a copy of Jen Fisher's book, Hope is the
And there will be an
Strategy.
audiobook. I get this for my husband is a diehard audiobook person, and so I did read and narrate the audiobook. That
Fantastic.
itself was quite the experience, but there will be an audiobook, and that comes out the same publication date, January 27th. So if you're an audiobook listener, you can get that through Audible or wherever you get your audiobooks.
Wherever great books are sold. Okay, our
Yeah.
rapid fire last question that I ask every one of my guests. What advice do you have for the person listening to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing?
Um, well, obviously, I think, start leaning into hope. Um, and and whatever that looks like for you, knowing that there is a science and a practice of hope. And obviously, you can learn more about that from my book, but there's also lots of other great thought leaders and researchers that have come way before me doing this work. But lean into hope. It really is a game changer from a personal life perspective, but also a leadership perspective. um, Something stop doing. Oh, please stop saying hope is not a strategy. Please stop saying hope is not a strategy.
Love it.
And what's the third one you want me to answer?
Continue to
What
do.
do you want to continue? Look, we talked about this before, but believing in yourself and believing that where you are right now is where you're supposed to be, and it is enough. And and just being comfortable and being able to sit with that as hard as it might be.
Yeah. Jen
Yeah.
Fisher, this was so incredible. And for the person listening, let me tell you, it covers this book that I had the privilege to pre-read. It speaks to you as an individual and gives you such incredible actionable tips. It resonates at such a personal level. Jen really exposes her authentic story, her vulnerability. It speaks to you as a leader for those of you who lead others. And it really speaks to organizations and some of the systemic changes organizations can make to create more hope-filled cultures. So there's something in it for everyone. It would be a great pre-order gift for someone in your life, a gender agnostic. So for yourself or a sponsor, supporter, a loved one in your life. Jen Fisher, thank you so much. That concludes today's episode of Climbing the Corporate Ladder Without Breaking a Heel. Until next time, you've got this. Congratulations on choosing to invest in yourself. I know your time is precious. Thank you for spending it here with me. I believe in helping you look up, step forward, and fully realizing your potential. If today's conversation resonated, I'd be so grateful if you'd rate and comment on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And if you know someone who would benefit, please share this episode with them. Let's stay connected. Visit me at dr-cynthia.com, and you can find me on all the socials at Dr. Cynthia Bentzen-Mercer. Until next time, remember, boldly start working on your future today.